second Senior Humanities event of the semester. Before we begin, I would like to remind you to please turn off all your cell phones for the duration of the event. As many of you know, the Senior Humanities program provides TASIS seniors and PGs with a signature educational experience, drawing on the best elements of the TASIS identity: truth, beauty, goodness, international understanding, and humanitarian action. Following tonight's talk, you are all invited to come to Casa Fleming for dessert and an opportunity for further discussion. Tonight, we are delighted to welcome Adora Svitak as our connection to goodness. Adora is a 13-year-old author, teacher, activist, and speaker from Washington State. She's published 2 books, countless short stories, essays, and poems, and is in great demand as a speaker. Adora teaches about what interests her: literacy, good education, leadership, and world issues. By bringing awareness to these aspects of life and fundraising for their promotion, Adora campaigns globally for a better world where children and adults alike have their needs, wants, and lives fulfilled. Please help me give a warm welcome to Adora Svitak.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I wanted to start by quickly following up on the introduction. So if any of you are wondering, what is it? Maybe some of you have seen me. Did anybody see me walking around? Yeah, so I was going to a couple classes, so it's very nice to be part of the TASIS experience. If you're wondering what this girl was doing, walking around, going on classes, then I feel extremely privileged to be able to come here to TASIS to speak to all of you. And so raise your hand if you're a senior. I see, yeah, most of you guys are seniors, and I'd like to welcome the few lower grades out there. So thank you all very much for attending. And over the past couple of, actually it's only been today and yesterday that I've spent here, but it feels like a wonderful time and a lot of time as far as the amount of learning I've taken in, just going to the library, going to classes, and meeting some excellent people on the Senior Humanities program. So I'd like to thank all of you for making that possible. Round of applause. Senior Humanities program. I'd like to thank you very much. So this is the book that I published when I was 7. It's called Flying Fingers, and this is really what started me with teaching, and I'll be talking a little bit about some of the work that I do later in the presentation. But for now, I just wanted to open up the presentation. I know it's kind of a cheesy title, but I thought, I was really inspired by, if any of you saw the Project Red, like they put red in parentheses after stuff, I thought that would be applicable with the TH. So I wanted to start with a couple of pictures, and as I move through them, I want you to think about which of these people is not a leader. Okay, you want to say, anyone? Just throw out what you think. Paris Hilton. I'm hearing some Paris Hilton. I know some of you may also have your own views about the other ones, but I think that's the majority that I'm hearing. But really, this is kind of a trick question, because even Paris Hilton has managed to parlay her rather dubious celebrity into successful money-making ventures. For those of you who read her book, it spent 5 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, and although people may not respect her, evidently they listened to her because at last check last night, she had 3,069,138 followers on Twitter. Maybe some of you in the audience are among those followers. And then I, out of curiosity, checked it this morning, and it actually jumped by 1,800 people over the course of 24 hours. I don't follow Paris Hilton on Twitter or otherwise, but it's really interesting to think that over 3 million people are having their thoughts influenced by Paris Hilton every day when they log into Twitter. Is influence a form of leadership? I think that most of us can agree that leadership has many faces. Leadership has many manifestations. For example, if we can consider Paris Hilton a leader, since she does, after all, have the aforementioned 3 million followers, then it means that leaders can come in many disguises. Can you name a leader in the world today who is not a president, CEO, or elected official? Anyone want to throw out some names? I'm sorry? Paris. Okay, Paris Hilton. Who else? Okay, what about some leaders within your school? You think about that. Okay, Ria, sure. And it brings to mind a very important point. Leaders don't necessarily always sit in parliaments or governments. You can be a leader. Sorry. Leaders don't always have to be in halls of government. They can come in many different forms. It brings you to a very important question. What is leadership exactly? Does anyone know what are your thoughts as far as what defines leadership? Okay, great. What else?
A role model.
Being able to inspire. Role model. Anything else? What are some of your other definitions of leadership? Think back to leaders that you know of. What are some traits that define them?
Charismatic.
Charismatic, great. So I think that most of us can agree, you probably all have your own specific ideas on what makes a leader, but most of us can agree that a leader is someone who guides others in some shape or form. You can be a leader on the football field, in your classroom, online, in your community, or even the leader of the free world. And my personal goal is not really. Maybe in the future, but probably not too stressful. But first, you have to provide others with good reasons to follow you. In the case of becoming a president, then you have to give other people good reason to elect you. We were talking with some students about the process of becoming a proctor. You have to provide teachers with good reasons to allow you into that position. And I would say that probably good reasons to follow you does not include cultivating the public's interest to know who your new BFF is. By this point, some of you might be thinking, well, what's exactly the relevance of this? I don't particularly want to be a leader. And that might be because when you think of leaders, you think of people like Napoleon. But being a leader doesn't mean putting on a funny hat and leading troops into battle. It doesn't mean donning a pantsuit and stepping up to a podium. Some leadership can take the form of ideas. For example, does anyone know who this is a picture of? Nobody? Okay. Well, this is Harriet Beecher Stowe. And anyone heard of Harriet Beecher Stowe? Yes? Okay. Well, for those of you who might not have read too heavily about her, then she wrote a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. It sold 1.5 million copies in its first year, and this was in 1852. A sympathetic portrayal of American slaves that helped a lot of formerly oblivious people realize that slaves and African Americans were real people with real feelings and emotions. Uncle Tom's Cabin is widely credited with helping to spark the American Civil War. I mean, obviously many things did, but this was a book that had intense power. As far as when people read it, they were thinking, okay, maybe I'll support this side or another. And the American Civil War, of course, led to the eventual abolition of slavery. So maybe starting a civil war is not part of your master plan, but Stowe's story is a definite testament to the power of ideas. Just writing down one idea, writing down this story, was able to spark a conflict and was able to spark discussion about an issue which would continue to define history in the United States. Speaking of stories, I have a story to tell you, which I know is a funny transition, but it's more specifically a Greek myth. How many of you have heard of Prometheus? Here's some raised hands. I see some raised hands, yeah. Well, in ancient times, when Prometheus was one of the deities, he was actually a titan, I believe, and he was one of the original deities of ancient Greece, and he's supposed to have created humankind out of clay. And the primitive creatures that he brings to life have no knowledge or skills. They just huddle inside caves. It's dark, they're afraid, and they don't really have culture or a way to understand what they're missing. So they're just huddling in the dark. In a typically bombastic move, then Zeus comes along and decides to destroy them. This is Zeus over here, and this is Prometheus. True to his name, which means foresight, Prometheus decides to give his new creation several gifts, which will ultimately save them from destruction. Number one, which got Zeus kind of mad, was that he cheated the gods out of some nice sacrificial meat. But the one that we know better is fire, which in the story symbolized all knowledge. Skills, technology, arts, and science, because when you think about it, fire is something that really makes a lot of other stuff possible. The second gift is hope or optimism via Pandora's box, which is another story. The two gifts complement each other and give the new creatures a way to escape out of their ignorance, out of the darkness of their caves. With fire, humans can afford to be optimistic, and with optimism, they can use fire or knowledge constructively to save themselves. In the most famous version of the story, Prometheus Bound, which was written well over 2,000 years ago, then Prometheus is described as having philanthropos tropos, or a humanity-loving character. What word does philanthropos remind you of?
Philanthropy.
Philanthropy, right. So it's this character that impels him to give humanity the gift of knowledge and light, and the story gives us that word philanthropy, which can be defined as voluntary action for the greater good. Now, the rest of the story isn't quite so happy, because although this deal benefited the early humans, Prometheus stole fire, and Zeus isn't so happy about that, so instead of killing the humans, he turns his wrath to Prometheus and binds him to this giant rock, and an eagle eats his liver every day, goes back, and he's punished that way. So, kind of sad. I mean, he's eventually rescued, that's much later. So I'm not suggesting that you do anything that might put you at risk of giant liver-eating eagles. That's an idea. But I do think that we can take some amount of inspiration from this story. The love for humanity is at the heart of good leadership. Whether a great thinker or an elected official, a good leader works for the greater good of humanity. Much has been made of leaders like Abraham Lincoln and Barack Obama, who rose from humble beginnings to serve their country and the world with distinction. Can you think of anybody from a humble beginning who rose to lead the world in some shape, way, or form? Napoleon.
Hitler, Stalin.
Okay. Who else? Any other leaders? Well, I actually was thinking about this yesterday night when I was trying to think of examples of my own. And you know, when you think of leadership, a lot of people do turn to heads of states. But when I thought of the Beatles, actually my dad suggested it, I think, and you know, the Beatles grew up, they were in working class families in England, and they had this huge influence around the world just because they had these ideas, and they formed a band, and they were optimistic about that. So I think the Beatles are a good example of leaders who rose from humble beginnings. And I think it's important that we challenge this view of leaders of only being presidents and prime ministers, but it can be musicians and artists and athletes. As much as I admire Lincoln and Obama and the Beatles, there's also something to be said for those leaders, like in the Greek myth of Prometheus, came from relative privilege, yet decided to devote their talents to making the world a better place. If you think about Prometheus, he didn't really have to help the humans along. He could have just said, okay, just let them do their own thing. So, you know, that was pretty nice of him when you think about it. Here are some other leaders who came from privilege. Oh. Oops. Sorry about that. Who are some other leaders who came from privilege yet decided to use their skills to make the world a better place? Gandhi, okay, right in the slide. I don't know if that was cheating or whether you actually... Okay, I'm sure you had a real moment of inspiration. Franklin Delano Roosevelt got involved in politics and tried to help people, even though, again, it wasn't super, it wasn't super close to himself. He grew up in a fancy neighborhood and all. Eleanor Roosevelt, likewise. Mohandas Gandhi. You know, a lot of people, when you think of Gandhi, then you probably think of the guy sitting cross-legged on the floor in the loose-fitting robe, right? But there are actually, Gandhi actually grew up in an upper-class family in India. He was sent abroad for his education. He became a lawyer. And there are pictures of Gandhi in his suit, dressed up very nicely, probably like a lot of you guys. And it was the injustice that he saw and experienced that motivated him to give up the suit for the loose-fitting robe and to really become this activist. And he sacrificed a lot in order to do that. Probably not too many of you have heard of Francisco Madero, but like Gandhi, he was a respectable upper-class politician, but he decided to take the path of a revolutionary, and in the course, he helped to shape the course of Mexican history. Jessica Markowitz, and what makes Jessica different from the other pictures that we've looked at of leaders For one thing, she's still alive, and for the other thing, she's also a teenager. Jessica was a normal student at Seattle's girls' school when a person who worked at a nonprofit in Rwanda named Richard came to visit their house. And he told her and her family about the genocide that had taken place in his country. And she was so motivated when she heard about the terrible things that happened. She was so motivated to make change and to go there and help girls and children get an education. So today, her charity, Richard Rwanda and Kiwe, has chapters all around the world, and it's helping many, many girls get hope and opportunity. An example very close to home, Mary Chris Fleming, the founder of TASIS. You know, she could have just stayed in the United States, led normal life, but she decided to travel the world and bring an education to many students in countries who might not have had access. For instance, here at TASIS, you know, American students, a boarding school for American students was something very unusual in the, especially in Switzerland. I know that it was groundbreaking. And then a lot of the work that she did, bringing girls to travel, bringing these large groups of students to travel and see parts of the world that really weren't very explored. So I think that that's something very interesting and motivating here at your own school. Bill Gates, everyone knows about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So these are all examples of people who came from privilege, who had a lot of opportunity, but then decided to make sacrifices to put their talents and their time to work. Angelina Jolie. To go back to Eleanor Roosevelt, what do you guys know about Eleanor Roosevelt? Have any of you studied her or heard about some of her work? She helped women in the Depression. Yes, she helped a lot of people. She went around the U.S. So not too many people know a whole lot about Eleanor Roosevelt, but the general, as far as her upbringing, she grew up in a fancy house in New York City. Her mother was a very celebrated beauty. Her parents were both very well known in social circles. Her father was actually the brother of Theodore Roosevelt, who, as you know, became president. So this is a picture of her as a child. She was raised by her grandmother after her parents' deaths and educated in Europe, and then she returned to the States to have her debutante party at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. So this is her around that time period. And although she had personal tragedies in her own life, such as the deaths of her parents, she also had, in many ways, a very sheltered upbringing. She didn't have first-hand experience with starvation or really know what it would be like to be penniless. This is an image of a poorhouse from around Eleanor Roosevelt's time period. She never experienced the frustration that comes from being deprived of an education. And she easily could have spent all of her life sitting around on cushions and eating sorbet and planning elaborate tea parties, which sounds very tempting. She could have been the Paris Hilton of her time. And yet, as a young adult, she worked in the slums in New York City. And as her husband gained political power, she worked with the Women's Trade Union League to campaign for issues like a minimum wage and as well as the abolition of child labor. Even though she didn't have to work, then she decided to go and teach literature and history at a girls' school, which I thought was very interesting. And then when her husband became president, she traveled around the nation listening and speaking to citizens. She took up the controversial issue of women's rights, as well as civil rights, and risked her own popularity that way. So the more powerful she got, the more she decided to help people. Eleanor Roosevelt had the imagination to understand the suffering of the less fortunate, and she had the imagination to create solutions to this suffering. She wielded the gifts of Prometheus, knowledge and optimism, with infinite grace. I admire Eleanor Roosevelt, like a lot of other people, for the work that she did to further human rights around the world. But she is also a personal hero of mine because she didn't have to do what she did. She intentionally sought to understand sectors of society that were unknown to her. She decided to go out into the slums, to go talk to people. And when she came to understand these problems that plagued others, she looked for solutions. And although I certainly didn't grow up on the Tea Party circuit of New York City, I grew up on the totally other coast, I too feel privileged. Like you, my family was able to invest in my education. When I was little, my dad and mom, they were big fans of books. They would read to me, and it was through that I really got my first exposure to literature and reading and writing. I was able to publish my first book at the age of 7 because of that education, because of the opportunity I had to be exposed. This is an image of me on Good Morning America. But most of all, I feel privileged to be standing here talking to you today. I'm definitely not Eleanor Roosevelt. I'm not exactly Prometheus because I'm rather fond of my liver, so that's a good thing. But I do also want to devote my life to the interchange of knowledge, because I believe learning and knowledge offer us a way to change our futures for the better. Since I began teaching, I've spoken at hundreds of schools and addressed crowds of thousands of people. And a lot of people ask me, well, what do you get out of this? And what I say is I get out of it the opportunity to meet people like you. I get out of it the opportunity to see the fulfillment that I get out of my work. When I was in Vietnam, I was able to raise $30,000 to help contribute to relief efforts there after flooding. And that's the kind of thing, it's not so much the numbers, but just the knowledge that I've helped in some way that really makes me happy. More recently, I've begun working with the World Food Program. It's a UN program to distribute food to hungry people, and I'm a youth representative, and I spread the word about their website, freerice.com, which is basically answering questions. You get 10 grains of rice from sponsors to help others. So next time you have the temptation to slack off, maybe you can answer some trivia questions instead and help the world. The free rice process sounds simplistic. You're just answering the questions and donating rice, but I want to emphasize that leadership doesn't necessarily have to be hard. When you think of leadership, again, you might have an image of really arduous work or doing a lot of very difficult stuff, but it can be as simple as spreading the word. It can be as complex as spending your lifetime devoted to an issue. I want you to listen to the blog post I wrote for the World Food Program when I began working with them, which is sort of representing this. So I wrote this in summer. Eat your vegetables. It's the slow, deliberate order that I, and most kids my age, dread hearing every night at dinner. And then, of course, after we not so politely refuse to do so, there's the expected kids in Africa are starving, Although we may usually brush this aside, I've grown to realize how much that really means, and how much that phrase belies. At the most basic, it's not just Africa anymore. Looking at the World Food Program's highly informative website, I learned that there are malnourished children and adults in Asia, the Americas, and the Middle East, too. I was recently in Los Angeles, California, where my mom and I took public transportation like buses and subways, giving us a chance to see the city. Looking out the window, I was stunned by the striking comparison between glitzy Hollywood McMansions and run-down streets with boarded-up windows and decrepit houses. This kind of juxtaposition is not limited to cities where the rich and poor live in bordering neighborhoods. It can be found in the distinctive neighborhoods of our globe, our nations. The widespread nature and inequality involved with an issue like hunger make it a complex and challenging problem. Although inequality seems to exist anywhere in the world where non-identical people live, and in areas as diverse as education and healthcare, it is particularly noticeable when it comes to food. When I observed my own family's eating habits, a lot of our behaviors are wasteful. Though we try to, eating all of our leftovers is still going above and beyond. If no one likes something, we return it or throw it out. Sometimes perfectly good food rots away in our fridge or in our cupboard. Probably the same for some of you here. And my family is probably better than most. In many areas of the United States, food isn't about getting enough calories to live. Many of us get too many calories to live. It's for the sake of pure taste, recreation, socialization, or even status. I'm not sure, but I have a feeling there isn't a huge market for fancy gourmet meals in a place like Djibouti. On the other hand, pricey restaurants with small portions seem to be everywhere here. Food is intertwined with social mingling and recreation. It's used for contests, bobbing for apples, hot dog eating contests, and the like, and for parties and events. Food is about fun, but the reality that I see here at home isn't a reality for countless other kids around the world. For them, food is a basic need. It's about survival. When I push away my plate of vegetables, someone else could be dying for the lack of them. It's a powerful thought. Does this mean that I'll eat my vegetables every night? I can't promise you that. Does this mean that I'll try to end hunger so that more kids can have the luxury to not have to eat theirs? Definitely. So that was a blog post that I wrote for the World Food Program regarding some of the leadership positions that I'm taking as far as spreading the word about free rice, doing other things with the World Food Program. And I think that a lot of people kind of tune out to the bad things that are happening in the world because sometimes problems seem so huge and complex that it's like, well, I can't really solve that. But taking things one step at a time, really looking at the ways that you can help is very important. Not to tune out and to really think about other kids on the other side of the world. That was what I did. And I learned a lot about charitable causes through the travel and conferences that I've attended. Again, that power of leadership through ideas. I was actually lucky enough to be able to organize a conference of my own called TEDx Redmond. Here are some pictures from the event. And TEDx Run was an event entirely run and organized and attended by kids. We had a youth committee making decisions with 19 speakers and performers under the age of 16. So Jessica Markowitz, who I mentioned earlier, was one of our speakers. And our speakers include kids who had started charities and harmonies, published books, played with renowned symphonies. We had the youngest kid to climb Mount Everest. So raise your hand if generally the first person or the first image that comes to mind when you think of leaders, do you think of adults? Would you raise your hand if you say that's usually true? Myself, when I think of leaders, I still have to change that image of like, Winston Churchill is probably someone I might think of, and again, an old guy. So, it's just what we have ingrained in our heads, but it's very important to emphasize that that doesn't have to be the image of leadership. We were trying to change that, and with 19 good examples at TEDx Redmond, I hope that we did. Pulling off a conference is obviously a lot of work. Some of the senior humanities program people in here will definitely know that, but pulling off a conference is a lot of work, but it was also a lot of reward, because being able to watch these speakers and hear from them and learn from them, it was just an excellent opportunity. And it doesn't have to be all about work either. Working as a leader and an educator has given me the opportunity to travel to and speak at awesome conferences like TED. Have any of you been watching TED videos? I see some raised hands. So TED is basically a conference in California that has some very high-profile people come and speak. So I got to meet people like Matt Groening and Steve Wozniak in my time there, and it was a really incredible time. And although I enjoyed meeting celebrities and staying at the occasional fancy hotel, getting to sample delicious cuisine from all over the world, especially here in Switzerland, very, very nice pizza and pasta and all kinds of Italian food, I find that the work itself, not just the reward, is also tremendously interesting. At every event, I feel really privileged to be able to share my ideas. And I also learn something new from the people who I talk to, because I'm a big believer in the fact that I'm not like the ultimate source of knowledge or authority. A lot of my material comes from hearing from the people at events like you. And it allows my ideas to expand and deepen so that the next people I talk to can hear something from you. So I'd like to hear some of your ideas on the subject of philanthropy and leadership. I know that TASIS has a long tradition of leadership and community service. TASIS was founded, according to the website, with the goal of creating greater understanding between cultures and fostering communication, collaboration. Talking with students, one of the greatest things about your school is that there are so many people from different cultures, and for me, one of the lovely things about traveling is that I'm able to really see the whole world, and at a school like yours, the world really comes to you through the people that you meet. If you look at some TASIS alumni who've gone on to do amazing things, even your famous villains are philanthropists. For example, this is Billy Zane. Maybe some of you may have watched his movies. And although he's best known for playing the villain, he's actually a supporter of the Hillsides Foundation, a safe haven for kids who have been abused. So you see examples of people from TASIS who are going on to do great things. For those of you who are seniors, you're going to be going out into the world making a difference in whatever it is that you choose to do in your life as you go on to college, as you go on to careers. I hope that you'll keep in mind that leadership isn't something that it's like a hat you put on and you take off and you occasionally use. It's something that goes with you throughout your entire life. And it's clearly not just graduates who are impressed with your achievement. I was talking with students and hearing about some of your service learning programs, which I know are pretty incredible. I hear that TASIS students are fundraising to build educational opportunities in Kenya. Is that right? Yeah, okay. And TASIS students have been building houses in Portugal and Cambodia, working to promote malaria education, cancer research. Raise your hand if you participate in the TASIS service learning program. I'm seeing lots of raised hands. Okay, so can you tell me about some of the stuff you've been working on specifically?
We talked about the school in Kenya. That's wiser.
Okay.
A lot of people here are part of that. We're just in the meeting actually.
Oh, great. Okay. So, and how is the school doing in Kenya?
Someone we have an anonymous donation from someone at Duke University. If we raise $150,000, she offered to match it up. So we're looking at that.
Wow, that is very generous. I'm glad to hear that. Who else would like to tell me about some of the things they've been working on regarding service learning?
Last year, Habitat for Humanity took a trip to Portugal and helped a family build the foundation of their house for a week, and it was really nice. It was a really good trip.
Great.
Yeah.
Who else?
This year, Caring for Cambodia is doing a fundraiser where students can purchase teddy bears that will be sent to
teddy bears for children in Cambodia. That's wonderful. What else? As if this isn't already, but okay. So what about anything coming up or anything in the past you can share? Excellent. And I think that that's a really important part of sometimes just putting a smile on someone's face. That personal connection is excellent. And raise your hand if you have an idea, a pet project, a cause of your own that you think will make the world a better or more interesting place. It can just be an idea. You know, it doesn't have to. Yes.
Well, there are a lot of programs that people can participate in to actually make the world better.
Okay.
And even if they're like small scale TASIS or, I don't know, like some sports or university activity still contributes to the global picture.
So getting more people to work at the grassroots level in their schools to contribute to the big picture, I think that's very important. Who else has ideas for how they can get either other students or other people to help contribute? Could be outside of school, inside school, any of your ideas as far as how you're getting yourself and others to lead. Yes?
I'm actually also part of WISER, and last year we took a trip to Kenya, and we focused really around the idea of empowerment. And even though this is my last year at TASIS, I really want to continue working with WISER and promoting the idea of empowerment.
Great. Promoting the idea of empowerment. Very, very powerful. I know that sounds repetitive, but I think you bring up a great point there. Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned, with Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin, when she sat down and she wrote that story, who knows if she thought there might be a civil war because this issue is so contested. I mean, when you think about your ideas, I talked to the yearbook group yesterday, and I was telling them about how the yearbook can be a time capsule and how what they put down in the yearbook can have an impact, and other people may look at it as far as a historical reference, and so how things that we think are small can have long-reaching impact. So the ideas that you have today, the ideas for leadership, for charity, for philanthropy, these are ideas which, who knows, maybe will grow and spread and have an impact on the world. So what are some of the things that you've learned from giving back to the community?
Feels good.
Feels good, right? Good karma, that's always, it's worth it.
Everything helps.
Everything helps.
I think we owe it to each other to pay it forward.
We owe it to each other to pay it forward.
Makes people happy.
Makes people happy.
We become more aware as an individual.
We become more aware as an individual. And you bring up a really good point there, because a lot of times the way that we get news, it's very passive. We watch the news, we see what things happen, but I think becoming involved on a really local sense gets us to understand the issue better. So as far as from a learning perspective, it's excellent. What are some of the things other things you've learned? It could be a personal story of yours from one of your service learning trips. I know that high school students are renowned for never wanting to share. I mean, it's like elementary school. It's, hey, we're going to sit in a circle and talk about show and tell, and somehow something of that is lost. I don't know, it's our theory of raising joint, but, yeah, okay. Well, I think something that I've learned just from hearing you guys tell me about what you've learned from your service learning projects is that it's not just about helping others, it's also about helping yourself understand the issue, helping yourself feel better about the work that you're doing. And so yeah, it really is in two ways. We've talked a lot about leadership and philanthropy and the power of the individual to change the world, but I think it's also important to consider why you want to become a leader, why you want to make the world a better place in the first place. Raise your hand if you want to make the world a better place. Unanimous? Okay, I'm not going to ask raise your hand if you want to make the world a worse place, because I think that would be unanimous in the other direction. But here's the other question. Why? Why do you want to make the world a better place? If this sounds obvious, then I think it's a really important thing to consider. What is your motivation for doing service? What is your motivation for helping the world? I want to get just a couple ideas from students and write them down. Why do you want to help the world? Because there's always the possibility to do something better. Okay, if Microsoft Word will load in time, then there we go. Equality, what else?
Because we should use that we have to use other people to help other people that.
We could improve the world for future generations.
Future generations, that's something I hear a lot. Actually, when I spoke at TED, I don't know how many of you have seen the TED video, I know a few people have, but I actually was joking a little bit, but I said to the audience, you know, you want to listen and learn from kids because there's always a chance that cloning is possible, and if so, that means going through childhood again. And so it was sort of the similar idea of future generations. You never know how long you're going to live either, so good to keep in mind if you don't really care about your grandchildren. But always think of future generations. Okay, what else?
Because people have the right to lead satisfying lives, and if you can help that process, then...
Human rights to satisfying lives. Okay.
I mean, we're in a pretty good situation, and the best we can do is help other people to be able to live in such a situation.
Okay, so privilege leading to our... Because we're privileged, then we have a duty to help others. I think that's also something important to consider. So now I'm going to pass out some slips of paper, and on that slip of paper, I want you to complete the following sentence. I know fill in the blank is a little elementary, but I think you can come up with something meaningful within this context. On a slip of paper, complete the following sentence. I want to make the world a better place, so blank.